There were some crazy ideas in the beginning, but actually the interesting thing, we had a lot of changes. We had a lot of reorganizations in the past 15 years, but what always has been consistent was the vision. Our founder from the very beginning said, there is value in that battery. And the vision was from the very beginning, the 0-0 story. And that has been consistent until today.
Welcome back to In Between Charges, the perfect podcast to listen to while waiting for your EV to charge. I'm Kevin Spangenberg, and I am joined, as always, by Mike Hawks. Mike, how are we doing today?
Doing good, thanks. I always like this time of year. It is end of the first quarter. The days are getting longer. The days are getting slightly warmer, and as we were talking a little bit this morning, but also it's a really exciting time for the EV industry. The auto news is starting to come out, how many cars have been sold, and also we're starting to look at various different events. So you've got the show in Vegas that's coming up. We've also been speaking with our guest about Power to Drive coming up in Munich, London EV show, and then also as the year goes on, various things in London and in Italy and France too. So very excited.
Did you hit your Q1 targets?
We did hit our Q1 targets. Yeah. Not yet. So we're still middle of March as we're recording this, right? But still very much on track. And the industry as well is looking pretty good, at least in Europe, right? I know there's a lot of discourse about what's happening with the administration in the US at the moment.
And Tesla too.
And Tesla
we're not here to talk about Tesla. Mike, fleet is hot right now, especially like in Belgium, a surprising growth engine of EVs in Europe right now. They were like maybe the biggest surging country in Europe last year in terms of EV sales, grew about 40%. And a little big chunk of that comes from fleet and different ways that they're incentivizing the adoption of electric vehicles for corporate fleets in Belgium.
I thought fleet has always been hot. It's burning hot.
It's burning hot now. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with a leader in the fleet electrification space. The company is German, but they deliver critical charging solutions all over the world. And our guest is Heiko Bayer, who is managing director at the Mobility House, where he dedicates his days to the electrification of fleets across the globe. Heiko has deep experience in this area, and we are really excited to dive into the fleet solution space, the way tech and partnerships are driving the Mobility House's success, and why fleets are so critical to hitting emissions reductions targets. Heiko, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Very happy to be here.
Great. So, Heiko, maybe we could start with a quick introduction to yourself and to the Mobility House. How long have you been with the company, and where does the Mobility House sit in the charging and fleet ecosystem?
Sure. I'm with the company now since early 2013, so I've experienced many ups and downs of the industry and the company as well. So I've seen a lot of different phases of e-mobility and looking very forward to that hopefully soon coming real ramp up in 25 and the following years. Mobility House itself, we are a company that is structured into three different businesses. One is what we call TMH charging, where we basically tackle the first problem of both private customers, but also fleet customers in terms of how can I charge my vehicle, meaning enable charging, selling charging stations, selling accessories and stuff like that. Then the second part of the company we call TMH Solutions, which I'm responsible for. And here we look at especially at the fleet and depot sector, offering end-to-end turnkey solutions to fleets and to parking depots, and also offering a product called Charge Pilot, which is a charge and energy management to reduce the total cost of ownership of fleets and increase the reliability. And the third part of Mobility House is our energy business, where we basically make use of the vehicle's flexibility, of the battery flexibility, and commercialize that flexibility in energy markets. And by doing this, all these businesses pay into our vision that has always been zero emission at zero cost, 0-0.
Let's maybe dive into that solutions piece right here. And you've talked about the three divisions at the Mobility House. Why did you kind of need to break it up? And what makes the solutions piece kind of so separate from the charging and from the battery piece and everything? And then a little bit like what goes into providing a whole fleet solution to the Mobility House's clients?
Thanks for the question. We did reorganize the company about 12 months ago. Until that point in time, we tried to do everything together. And we came to a point where we realized this whole thing gets too complex. We have very different businesses here. We have different customer segments. We have different maturity levels also of these separate businesses. And we also start to have different technology. So then we said, how can we reorganize? And we decided to reorganize according to the different, let's say, steps in the hierarchy of needs of customers. Enable charging first, minimize cost and increase reliability second, and then realize the value pools in the third step. And the solution piece is also twofold. On the one side, we have a quite large solution business for fleets and depots where we deliver end-to-end turnkey solutions, because most fleets have the problem that they're not able to deal with the complexity that comes along when electrifying the fleet or the parking garage or the depot or the bus depot. And what we do is we offer everything from planning over infrastructure, over billing, over CPO services, but also, of course, charge and energy management, and then a corresponding energy tariff and the possibility to put that fleet into use in the energy markets. And bundling all that into one holistic solution is what we are convinced a success factor to help fleets electrify, because let's say 80 to 90% of our customers today cannot do this themselves. They don't have the know-how, the personnel, and also they don't want to do that themselves.
Yeah.
So solutions is key here. And then the second part of the business is our technical backbone, our charge and energy management Charge Pilot, where we say this is, of course, part of our solutions as well, but we also enable other solution providers or big logistic fleets who can source themselves to use our charge and energy management and put them to use into their ecosystem. And the solution business is more a Central European business so far, and the Charge Pilot business is a global business. And we have sites up and running on almost every continent now, except Africa.
Very nice, very nice. And can I ask maybe the Mobility House, so how deep do you go with that planning cycle? Are you focused on, yes, obviously there's the transition of how many charge points you need, what the specific charging use cases are, and what the most efficient locations for those vehicles are. But do you also look at vehicle classes as the asset type that needs to be retired? And how do you also phase in electrical vehicles?
It depends. What you talked about is more something that we do, for example, in the US. In Europe, the market is a bit more mature, and most of our customers know what they want when they start electrifying. So we have big logistic customers and logistic partners who basically know we want to electrify these 50 sites, or corporate customers who do the same. And here it's mainly about how can I set up my infrastructure in the perfect way? How can I avoid to have stranded assets in the future? Because a lot of companies in the first wave of electrification experienced problems a few years in, that they realized they have chosen partners or hardware that are not really connected, that are not really smart. And now they have hundreds of charging stations on site, which they can't make use of. So we more focus on the charging infrastructure, on how we can integrate PV and battery, and how we can make the best use of an existing grid connection.
How does the TMH solutions team differentiate or divide up fleets? Because fleet, it means a lot of things. How do you think about it? Because a corporate fleet's going to have very different needs than a logistics fleet.
So in the upper level, we categorize in basically two. One is fleets, which is covering everything from corporate fleets to logistic fleets, and others. Basically, we approach this from a use case perspective. And the other big segment is parking, where we say people are not owning the vehicles themselves, or the company does not own the vehicles themselves. They come there to charge, or they want to provide the possibilities for guests and others to charge there. And the fleet space is basically companies who own the vehicles or who have charging and driving as their core business.
Okay.
Or as part of their core business.
Okay, so you do some public charging as well. Some of this infrastructure is open and is like available to the public, say at a car dealership?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we do offer that, and we can also provide that. We are not very active in the public charging space, but we can enable our customers to make use of that and to do that.
So then I guess you've mentioned a few different use cases there, and I guess it also goes all the way up to heavy duty vehicles. And of course, our sweet spot is working with charging operators, and their main business model is how do you maximize utilization of charge points? But when you add in vehicles as a brand new asset class, when you're perhaps looking to, your need is essentially very, very different. It's not just about utilization of charge points, it's about efficient use of energy and making sure that all of your individual drivers get to the right place at the right time and can charge kind of as they need. Can you maybe help us understand a little bit what the needs of those different cases are, so between parking and then fleets, and how in the solutions team you perhaps address them?
I mean, the first wave of electrification, that the questions were much more simple. Like basically, how can I charge? Grid connection wasn't really a problem in most cases because we had fleets of, 5 to 10 vehicles who needed to charge. It was more problem about getting charging stations, install them, make this kind of process more reliable. And also then more and more integrate billing possibilities and CPO backends. But then maybe 5 to 6 years ago, we realized that power is becoming an issue, available power on site, because fleets were getting bigger, utilization grew, and then charging and energy management became more and more important. And this has changed a bit the complexity also, because before we only talked about how can I charge this vehicle? Then we introduced, and of course had corresponding planning and installation around that. And then we introduced things like billing in different use cases for homeowners, for fleet owners, for guests at fleets, but also make charging stations public, for example, parking garages and stuff like that. And then in the last couple of years, we now see an increasing demand of how can I integrate existing PV infrastructure? How can I integrate with batteries? I've now have 100 charging stations of manufacturer A, but now with the new RFQ I have out, or with the new sourcing schedule, I'm going to buy 200 charging stations of manufacturer B. Can you make sure that these work perfectly together and that I don't have stranded assets and I don't need to exchange the hundreds that I purchased a few years ago? So this has been the journey that we see, and that is pretty similar over all segments.
These are corporations, companies that we're speaking about here. Are they increasingly electrifying their fleets because it makes sense from a cost point of view? Or do you think it's more regulations that are kind of driving this? They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So what are you kind of seeing and hearing from these companies that, as you get, I imagine, and we hope, are getting bigger and bigger requests from bigger and bigger companies?
I think in general, they do this because they see the chances and the necessity when it comes to the total cost of ownership once you can manage the complexity. But we also have customers, quite a few, who actually also have some, let's say, they do this, how you said, out of the goodness of their hearts. They really also believe in the transition, that they want to do something for it.
Yeah.
And of course, then we see other things like ESG regulations, where you have these targets, and especially our customers from the logistics space, they kind of have to, because if you have certain CO2 guidelines or ESG guidelines, it's just much more easier to transition your fleets to drive electric than to, change something in the industrial process of your production. But there also is, in many cases, some goodwill involved and say, I really want to do this.
I think it's a really interesting topic to talk about, because from a just initial cost point of view, and at first glance, when you look at the case, it kind of seems like a no-brainer. But then they also have to think about, okay, how long have my cars been on the road for currently? How do I also then choose the right vehicle that then needs to replace them? Is it that they actually can't compete on price or speed or reliability of the delivery if there is another company that surpasses them with being able to operate their network in a much more efficient way? I don't know if moving to an electric means you have more electric fleet, means you have access to more information about where your vehicles are at any one time. So you change the whole last mile delivery model, perhaps. I guess they've got to be thinking 10, 15 years ahead.
We have fleets who see that and also who want to be at the forefront of this transition also when it comes to apply VGI to fleets. For example, we have fleets in operation that, besides having all the turnkey solution and the local charge and energy management and PV consideration and stuff, they also make first steps into doing real dynamic tariff optimization. And if we look at the TCO relevant impact on this journey, is we typically save around 30 to 70% when it comes to everything we do behind the meter. So in safe grid connection and in grid fees. So something in between 30 and 70% of that typical cost we can save. If we then go the next step and say we also apply a dynamic tariff optimization of available dynamic tariffs in the markets, we can again save these customers an additional 20 to 25% on their energy cost, which is already pretty huge for fleets. If you have megawatt hours of energy that go through your depot every week, that becomes relevant very, very quickly. And if we then even go the next step and say we do real VGI, meaning unidirectional integration of battery flexibility into the short-term markets, we can extend that saving to almost 50%. And then basically every fleet who has a lot of energy consumption realizes very quickly that their total cost of ownership and their cost per mile reduces significantly. And this then, besides wanting this transition, becomes a business decision very, very quickly.
You mentioned a couple different technologies there, but maybe we can talk tech for a second here. And the Mobility House is bringing a lot of technology to bear in these solutions. And so maybe you could kind of identify one or two either kind of innovations that the Mobility House kind of brought to this fleet space, and then kind of that is really lowering this cost of ownership or really kind of pushing this fleet electrification space forward.
Yeah. So when we start behind the meter, saying what typically fleets require today, our part of the technology piece is the charge and energy management. We have developed a hardware neutral and also system neutral charge and energy management that we call Charge Pilot. And we help fleets electrify and connect to different assets, and make use of their existing ecosystem, connect to their fleet management systems, basically deal with the whole complexity while saving costs behind the meter. That's the Charge Pilot. When we then go one more step in front of the meter, it's of very little use to integrate single vehicles into energy markets. There's just not much you can do with it because you're not relevant with the capacity of a single vehicle. So we have built a pretty unique aggregation platform where we aggregate battery assets, both from stationary portfolio, but also from our fleets and also our B2C customers, and aggregate that to one big virtual battery or few big virtual batteries. And we could put them to use then via our trading platform into energy markets. And we are active as a trader on continuous short-term markets. And I think that chain of local asset connection, aggregation in the middle, and then trading that flexibility in energy market is a pretty unique chain, something that I'm not aware of anybody else has built so far. So we are very aware that, for example, many customers need billing much more in the beginning than that whole chain. But we also know that there are existing players and existing ecosystem out there, for example, Monta, who focus on that. And we rather partner up here than try to build this ourselves. We're really going to focus on the whole setting power over time thing.
Yeah. You've looked at the aggregation piece quite a bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting because so when electric vehicles are out, there's a brand new interface between the fuel source and essentially consumers and the vehicles that didn't really exist before. And I think, this is a really key role and why technology is needed to be able to make that connection happen. At Monta, it's very important for us to also invest in this space. So we've been building our grid services where we can start to pool essentially customers that opt in, so B2C customers that opt in for emergency scenarios that can help the grid balance, but then also, it's a little bit of extra cash in their pocket.
When you start getting a lot of power and you aggregate it, it becomes valuable, right? But for an individual, like you said, Heiko, an individual car battery is not a significant asset that you can really trade too much.
But I mean, if you do it in Germany, I think this is one of the markets which is perhaps the most advanced in Europe for it. As an individual driver, I think you can earn somewhere between 300 to 500 euros a year on this GHG emissions as you're claiming them. So it's not an insignificant amount as an individual.
Those regulatory possibilities, they exist. And I think from an energy market point of view, Germany has a lot of potential. The problem in Germany, especially in the private sector, is that the whole smart meter rollout is I call it a disaster. And
it's one word for it.
It's really hard to get customers ready to really enjoy the benefits of the technology that is ready. So for example, we are a German company and we have the first global V2G offering with Renault Live in France. We actually offer zero in France. Customers from an R5 can charge for free at home if they opt into our energy services and energy tariff. And this is something that we can do in France because here the regulatory landscape also on the metering side allows it. So far in Germany, unfortunately, that's not possible in the B2C space.
Yeah, I think we had a conversation with another German business and we were talking about the rollout of smart meters, and it's something like 1% or less of homes that now have the meter integrated. So the capacity and the capability is there. It's just taking a long time to get meters actually installed, and particularly those that are maybe certified.
Absolutely, yeah.
You don't have to necessarily go into specifics, Heiko, but you kind of talked about that whole stack that you've put together, and you're providing these services and solutions, and then you're aggregating some of this power and trading it in the market. Some companies are really at the beginning stages of their fleet electrification, right? And they need some charging assets, they need the correct billing, and that's about it. And you can offer that. But then there's V2, V3 when it really evolves and everything. Is that where you start to really see the return on investment here from beyond just selling that service at the beginning to now we're trading power, and this is where the money starts kind of kicking in? You don't have to go into specifics, but do you kind of see what I'm asking there?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, of course, the longer we can accompany our customers and partners, the better for us and also hopefully for them. We also have a profitable business before that. You can have a profitable business for a charge and energy management system that you bring into fleets and depots globally. And then, of course, if we move along and also enable those customers and partners to take part in the energy market, that's kind of the cherry on the cake for both of us. We want to have a little piece of it for our services and the technology that we build. But the main reason, the large portion of what we do there stays with the customer because they need to realize and feel that value. And especially in the fleet space,
yeah, I think it's really interesting speaking with a company that has gone through and really been a part of a transition really from the start, right? Since you said you joined in 2013, but the Mobility House founded when, 2009? So a year after the first Tesla Roadster came out, the Mobility House is there starting up with the electrification of fleets, right? Super early. And
really banking on the Leaf taking off back then. All right.
The Nissan Leaf is going to be the big
there were some crazy ideas in the beginning, but actually the interesting thing, we had a lot of changes. We had a lot of reorganizations in the past 15 years, but what always has been consistent was the vision. Our founder from the very beginning said, there is value in that battery. And the vision was from the very beginning, the 0-0 story. And that has been consistent until today.
Yeah, wow, cool.
It's really cool. Maybe touching on the kind of tech stack and how you've matured as an organization now, offering essentially this end-to-end solution, both with turnkey solutions, getting charge points in the ground, and then all the way through to essentially energy management and trying to provide this 0-0 tariff to fleets. We as a younger organization, we've been around for the best part of almost 5 years now. Mm-hmm. We've also found that as soon as you start tinkering in one area in this ecosystem, very quickly you touch different use cases, you touch different assets, and you also touch very different needs that have to be connected in some way. I guess, like any technology industry, you start off with a group of specialists that are very strong in one particular area, and then naturally that capability expands. How do you kind of view that approach at the Mobility House when it comes to partnerships, developing technology in-house?
Yeah, great question. Starting with why we decided to build our own technology, right? Because as a solution business, there are many solution businesses out there who don't have their in-house technology, and that works quite well. But what we from the beginning said was that we want to be relevant and also drive that field of charge and energy management behind and in front of the meter. And if you want to drive something, and if you're very early ahead, there was nothing when we started. So we kind of had to do it ourselves. We also intentionally wanted to, because we want to be an innovator in that space and we want to be at the forefront. So you have to develop the technology in-house. But we also realized very early on that we cannot develop everything. So you have to pick your spot where you say, this is where I built an excellent piece of technology. That's where we really create value to customers, and that's where we differentiate. And then we have a lot of different things that customers require. So when we go back to our solution business, I think, I don't know the exact number, but something in between 30 and 50% of our sites, we have some kind of third-party backend active that we enable through our OCPP proxy to connect to the charging stations and enable customers to use other backends such as Monta. So we decided there are things where we stick to our in-house technology that we develop ourselves, and there are things where we partner up as long as we have partners who follow some similar principles that then we do. And if we take Monta and TMH, for example, I think we started 1.5 years or so, and we already brought a 4-digit number of charging stations live from our network to Monta, because the partnership just works very smoothly. Because I think I have the feeling that we see a couple of things very similar when it comes to hardware neutrality, when it comes to customer value, and when it comes to being transparent to each other. We're both want to lead.
I think you mentioned something earlier, which is quite true. And I think it's true for us. It's, how do you build trust in the industry? And that's by knowing your area very, very well. And our core asset class is charge points. That's what we know. That's how we bring out trust in the industry to try to maximize performance, bring out visibility about how charge points are performing and developing themselves. And then I guess the other kind of keyword for us, and maybe it's the same for you too, is having an agnostic approach that really delivers flexibility in needs, because it is still a very new industry, even though your vision has been, yes, the energy management is a huge opportunity and that's something that you want to drive. Mm-hmm. Still 16 years on since being founded, this is still a very early industry and new kind of opportunities are coming out. And there's various different approaches to what charge points should be used, what are the main capabilities for smart charging, who's actually going to own the connection to the grid in the long run, etc.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said, the agnostic part, I would also extend that to other pieces of the ecosystem. That charger is one very important piece, of course, but we're also talking about power meters. We're talking about existing local facility management systems or fleet planning systems. We're talking about third-party backend systems. So all that thing, we consider ourselves as the neutral part of the customer's local ecosystem or local infrastructure. And we help customers to make use of the surrounding ecosystem in the best possible way. For a lot of our solution business, that goes along with Monta very well. But of course, we also enable other solution providers who might use different CPO backends to make use of our local controller.
We didn't sign an exclusivity agreement.
we will never sign exclusivity agreements.
Dang.
Okay. And you hopefully won't as well.
We also have similar views on exclusivity agreements.
No. That makes no sense.
Yeah, no, you have to stay open, right? Because an example of agnosticity like causing problems or lack of agnosticity causing problems is when a big CPO, they want to go with Monta, they want to switch from their previous backend, and the chargers are SIM card locked, right? And they might have 5,000 chargers that they want to flip over, and guess what? An electrician has to go and open up the charger and pop in a different SIM, right? It's frustrating, right? For us, and it's frustrating for the CPO. And we don't take that approach. We say, use whatever SIM card you want, right? Use whatever SIM card you want. And we hope that you're going to love Monta and use it. But if one day the relationship comes to an end, you can switch it over. For you guys with Charge Pilot and different elements, like you have to stay agnostic. And it's like, you hope that you can deliver a solution, provide a service that they're going to stay committed to you. But we know things change. And if you like locking people in and creating these contracts and relationships, it creates just an unpleasant experience and a difficult experience for everybody involved.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And we are also very honest here to ourselves and to our customers. There are many use cases and sites where Charge Pilot makes absolute sense, but these are more on the complex side. Charge Pilot might not make sense if you want to have 3 charging stations and you have enough grid connection, or a very simple static load management does the trick for you.
Yeah.
We will not force customers to use our technology. That's not what we build it for. And the same thing is if customers are happy, as we use OCPP and other standard protocols in the industry, that basically they can unplug the charging stations from our controller and point the backend to some other. We are not going to stand in the way of that. I think we have churn that is way below 1%. And so this approach proves us right. But also we have to accept the fact that it limits our market in a certain way. So right now we have 2,200 sites live, which is a quite nice number. But of course, if we would say we want to go on every site that we can theoretically connect to, that we force Charge Pilot on every customer that is out there, this number would probably be different. But we said we are going to play an infrastructure role in the more complex fleets, in the big fleets, in the fleets that really want to scale. We want to be relevant where we can create value, but we don't want to be a complexity that just adds potential error without having an added benefit to the customer.
Yeah. You like force the Charge Pilot on this like 3 charger AC charger site and everything. You're like, you need this for thousands of euros a month, whatever, and then they're like, do I? They don't know. Maybe they don't know. And you're like, you trust me, you need this. And then somebody comes in and is like, you really don't need that. You know that they're just trying to force the charge. I like that approach a lot.
Yeah. I think also in many cases, the complexities, they do come at scale. And for many companies that are running small, simple sites, that's exactly the type of experience that they want to be able to deliver and the type of operation that they want to manage. So let's maybe shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the market. I think it's something that we've been tracking very closely within Europe is the conversation around CO2 emission standards, and then also shifts in trends with EV adoption. Some also things happening across the US about predictability of what the sales volumes will be in the future. And perhaps Heiko, the Mobility House's home country, it's no secret that Germany has had a challenging year for EVs, maybe also for auto sales just in general. And you, of course, work with businesses where the vehicles is their direct asset class. How does that translate into your customers' future business plans and the type of conversations that you're having with them?
Certainly, the last year was really challenging, especially in Germany. And a big portion of our solution business is in Germany. So we felt it very directly. And what we also see is that, especially in the B2B space, doesn't matter if it's fleet or if it's parking, uncertainty does not help. So right now we have a new government is forming in Germany, for example. And so a lot of promises are being made. And of course, customers who think about big investments think twice if they do it now or they wait a little longer if some subsidies come around the corner. And this is something that we have seen on and off, especially in Germany in the past couple of years, especially with regards to EVs and the corresponding infrastructure. There is no doubt that the fleet market, especially in Germany, will continue to boom. We have partners now in Belgium as well who use our Charge Pilot. And for some reason, Belgium, France, and other countries completely decoupled from what we've seen in Germany last year. And this is good because it shows that the general trend is intact, that it just makes sense from a fundamental point of view to electrify. And we see this basically across all fleets and also in the meantime, globally. We have now our first office, small office, but still in Asia. And we see a lot of requests coming from there as well.
So walk me through this a little bit in terms of kind of the direct impact that you saw at the Mobility House, say in 2024, from these like declining EV sales, an uncertain regulatory environment.
What we've seen last year, especially in Germany, not so much in other markets, but especially in Germany, where like the whole story and the whole, let's say, public discussion about EVs shifted in a more negative direction than it has been before. And then, of course, some customers were questioning the whole transition, but most of them didn't. But what many of them did was, well, maybe there is a better time of extending my fleet. Maybe there is a better time of building that new charging park. Right now, my utilization is at 70%, I can still live a couple of months longer or half a year longer with the existing charging infrastructure. These thoughts all make sense. And of course, they will continue as long as we don't have that consistency. Do you see the same? How do you see that in different, you're active in more European countries than we are?
We were kind of chatting about this briefly beforehand, actually, and it is quite difficult to plan out because it depends on the utilization of individual operators' charge points currently, and I guess also whether they have sufficient funding and what their runway is and what stage of their growth they are. I mean, our kind of interpretation is that a shortfall or a short change in predictions in, EV sales will have a more direct impact on how many residential charge points are installed, of course, because there's less people choosing the EV as their corporate fleet or maybe buying them privately. But then for public and for workplace charge points, I believe there still is quite a gap or quite a deficit between the installed capacity that's required to service the number of charge points that's out there, particularly in Europe. And I think there's perhaps a bit of a difference if we talk about US versus Europe, and also how quickly certain regions and districts have been able to roll out charge points already. I mean, within Europe, the infrastructure and I guess the way that people travel, you don't tend to see as many charging deserts as you might do in the US. I don't know, Kevin, what would you say about the US market?
Well, just on that point of like the knock-on effects of lower sales than anticipated, but like the charging Monta, who we are partnering with say in France or in Italy or in Spain, the companies that were there in 2023 or 2024 are the same companies that are there in 2025, right? There might be some companies that have started up, but by and large, like the companies that we want to go, the utilities, the CPOs and everything that we want to go work with, they're still there. Like we have to still go win their business, partner with them, provide a great software for them to do that. Whereas like we're not selling charge points, right? The physical hardware. We partner with the Mobility House and it's like whether you guys install, it's more of an impact of whether you guys install or connect 1,000 charge points to Monta or 5,000 charge points to Monta is kind of where that's a little bit more downstream. Do you kind of agree with that, Heiko?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see both perspectives because we have a certain hardware part of the business and we've definitely felt it more over there than in the technology side of the business, of course. How do you see the differences between Europe and Asia and North America when it comes to the speed of the different customer segments? Because we see, interestingly, in some customer segments, Europe is leading the way and is much more mature. And then we see other customer segments, especially in the school bus and truck space, where North America is leading the way and going bidirectional today already, where nobody in Europe is really talking about bidirectional heavy-duty fleets.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good one for
so
you, Kev.
We hear a lot of the the need over there for these multi-fleet depots, the bus depots, the municipal depots. But there's just still such a shortage over there in America of infrastructure, of like good, high quality infrastructure in the public charging space and in the semi-public space, the multifamily residential space, that is where I see a lot of energy and a lot of investment and a lot of like really focus is going right now. And where we're seeing, okay, we just need more over there. They call it level 2 charging. Here they call it AC charging. They just need level 2 charging in a lot more places. They need DC charging in a lot more places. DC charging that works, right? Because like a lot of this, like Electrify America, I think is getting better, but for a long time had a reputation of not providing a good public charging experience. And we know that Tesla has been far and away the best provider over there. So it's a lot of companies that are trying to just deliver a better charging experience across all these use cases, right? And that's really what we're seeing in the US right now.
But the kind of split between kind of corporate and private purchases is still the same, right? The majority of vehicles that are being sold, electric vehicles, are purchased by commercial organizations and maybe leasing them out or it being a benefits program rather than private purchases.
I don't know if that's the case. It's not like a Belgium. I think there's...
Yeah, in Europe, it's kind of 60-40. Yeah. And then you have some outlying markets like the Netherlands and Belgium where they have very good tax incentives for companies.
Is the Mobility House's approach in the United States, is it different from what you're doing in Europe?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like my colleagues of the North American business unit could answer that much better, but I try my best. It has been very different in the last couple of years because just the market was evolving differently, where we had a very stable corporate charging business here. But what we have seen is that a lot of school bus depots, because they're so ideal to electrify, also so ideal to apply to V2G, has been electrifying. A lot of transit organizations did electrify their fleets, and that's where we tapped into. So we still have a very, very strong business when it comes to transit organizations and bus electrification in North America. And here we do see that, very interestingly, that these transit organizations and also the school bus segments is going V2G already. So we are talking about bidirectional offerings and products out there, which in Europe, no bus depot really talks about that yet. It will happen, but it happens first in North America. Then we can maybe apply the knowledge that we collected here in Europe, in the corporate space and in the logistic fleet space to the North American team and vice versa. So for us, that's a pretty cool development.
It's interesting, isn't it? Bringing your, I guess, a kind of approach here where you expect companies, or the model is companies, to go starting with charging, then being able to try to improve efficiency of the costs, how much energy they are spending, basically, all the way through to then, okay, how do you actually maximize the battery as an asset? And in the US, it's almost like you're starting from stage 2 or stage 3 already with some of these organizations, which is, in one way, you could say surprising, because the US is still, it's hovering around 10% sales share, right? It's still 1.2 million vehicles every single year. It's still a huge market. But I guess the technology that they're starting with is much more advanced, perhaps, than the technology we started with here when electric vehicles started to really grow out, right? They're starting with OCPP 2.0.1. We're still dealing with a lot of legacy of 1.5 and then not even OCPP before that for charge points. So I think also the capability is very different, right, in the US. Maybe that lends to what you're offering.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good thing for us is that the world behind the energy meter or the power meter looks very similar globally. You guys have to deal with all the tax stuff when it comes to billing and roaming. When we talk about charging energy management, the principle is very similar globally. Yeah. So for us, going to Asia, to North America is quite straightforward. And the determining factor is more how fast do fleets electrify and how fast does the utilization grow. And so this is, of course, a benefit on our side, where we currently talk with bus fleets and truck fleets in India, for example, in the same way we talk with fleets in Spain, because they have the exact similar problem.
I would love a world where I don't have to consider local tax regulations. Heiko, we wrap up every discussion with our guests with a final question, and now I'm going to pose that question to you as well. If you could dispel one myth about electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging, what would it be?
There's so many, but I think I would go with that operating a fleet of electric vehicles is more expensive than operating a fleet of, let's say, combustion engine vehicles. We see that the quite opposite can be the case. Yes, the first investment in vehicles and infrastructure is somehow costly. But when we look at the whole total cost of ownership, when we look at the lifetime with the possibilities that electric vehicles provide their owners and their operators, we are convinced, and we see real life data that actually operating electric fleets today can already be much cheaper than operating traditional combustion engine vehicles. That's a myth that is public perception, but I think more and more fleet customers, especially the ones who are dealing with that matter for more than a year or a bit longer, they've already realized that, and that will drive the transition very quickly.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I can imagine it is a hurdle to get over, to have a whole company essentially change this whole class of your business, where also the vehicles perhaps come last. The first thing you're thinking about is getting the deliveries there on time. You're thinking, yes, about kind of fuel spending, etc. And you also have a 15-year-old vehicle that you're like, you know what, this set of vans that I have, they're still kicking, they're still going. Do we really need to move right now, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But some of those vans are not allowed to drive into some inner cities anymore. So
true.
you
Also
have
true.
to do something. Yeah,
That's a good point. Yeah. That's called talking your book right there, right? That's when you go out and then he's like, fleets, TCO, it's lower than you think. And thankfully, Mobility House has a wonderful solution that can help you out with that. So Heiko, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us. The Mobility House and Monta, we are a year and a half partners, could say longtime partners, year and a half partners. It's a great partnership. We always love working with you and hope the same for you as well. And I think we're going to have a lot of success together. So thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting talk. And hopefully we will make a long-term partnership out of it.